Hello and welcome to my video. This cartoon is not made for children, so if you're under the age of 18, turn back now. Well, I tried. Enjoy!
It's the Gnome Fairytales with the evil gnome.
Hi.
Stop on by and lose an eye, maybe a tooth or two. It's the Gnome Fairytales with
Hi
the
there. Roger
evil gnome.
this.
Merriment and dismemberment
Hope you like it.
with the evil gnome.
Sipida. Shupua. Origins of the Evil.
Once upon a time, there lived a happy little gnome.
Hello.
He lived every day of his life in pure contentment.
I'm so content.
Until one day, the gnome had a bit of bad luck. The happy gnome awoke in his bed and realized that his alarm hadn't gone off at its usual time.
That's weird.
He noticed he had slept in and was now late for the weekly meeting of the local Cookie Makers Union.
Well, snickerdoodles.
He decided he didn't have time for his normal cup of joe and rushed out the door. Unfortunately, the wind had picked up the night before and made his doormat a tripping hazard,
Oh no!
and he fell directly into his trash can.
Oh,
As he hurried to pick himself up, he squished his hands into the rotten quiche he had thrown out the night before.
gross.
He wiped his hands on the grass, still in a hurry to make the meeting.
Okay, I should be good now.
Unfortunately, as he walked to leave, the gnome then slipped in a pile of dog doo his neighbor had left from earlier in the morning.
Son of a werewolf!
Now, smelling of excrement and feeling defeated, the gnome decided to skip the meeting.
I'm just gonna have my coffee, change my clothes, and relax.
The gnome changed his clothes and drank his coffee, and started to feel better about the rest of his day.
Maybe I'll go for a walk. That always helps me feel better.
Unfortunately, the walk did anything but help. As the gnome walked, he noticed that the rain from the night before had made the road muddy.
Well, doggone it.
So he walked carefully along the grass shoulder of the roadway. But as he came to the bridge over Fever Rot River, a carriage sped past the gnome. A wheel on the carriage struck the gnome and threw him into a pile of waste that had washed up on the shore.
Are you friggin' kidding me? You friggin' jerk! Seriously!
The gnome pulled himself free of the refuse and started after the carriage. He was going to give the driver a piece of his mind.
I'm gonna give that driver a piece of my mind.
So the gnome trudged angrily after the carriage. He imagined all the things he would say to the driver and the apology that awaited.
That jerk is gonna realize what he did and feel so bad.
When the gnome found the carriage, it was parked outside the mayor's house, and the driver was standing at the front. As the gnome approached, he noticed the royal crest on the carriage.
Ah yes, the prince is in town. Still, that driver had no right.
The gnome approached the driver, confident that he would resolve this issue and be on his way in no time.
Excuse me, sir.
The gnome said sternly. The carriage driver turned quickly to see the gnome standing before him.
Hello, little one. What can I do for... You smell horrid.
That's because you hit me with your carriage and threw me into the Fever Rot River.
Pardon me, sir. I would have noticed that, and I believe you are mistaken.
No, you hit me and I expect an apology.
It had to be another driver, of another carriage.
Do you see any other carriages?
That's not the point. Do you have any evidence?
Evidence? Are you kidding me? All I want is an apology.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. that you're such a confused little shit.
Excuse me? There's no need for profanity, sir. Now, if you don't apologize, then I will have to get the constables.
I'll tell you what. You can go get the constables, and while you're at it, you can fuck yourself.
Feeling a surge of anger, the gnome set off to find the constables. The head constable was enjoying a cup of hot chocolate and an orange scone at the Muffin Man coffee shop.
Constable General?
The gnome called out, and the constable general turned and smiled at the gnome.
Good afternoon, sir. What can I do for you? Smell awful.
Yes, because the carriage driver struck me on the road and threw me into the Feverrot River. That's why I'm here. I asked him to apologize and he simply started cursing at me.
Heavens me. Well, let's go see, shall we?
The gnome and the constable headed back to where the carriage was parked.
That's him, Constable, the driver who struck me.
Heavens me. You didn't say it was a royal carriage.
What? Why does that matter? He hit me on the road and drove off.
True enough, sir. I wouldn't be a very good officer of the law if I didn't at least try. Excuse me, sir.
The constable called out to the driver, who seemed surprised at the presence of the officer.
Ah, hello, Constable. How are you on this fine day?
I'm quite well, thank you. But there's a small problem that needs to be addressed.
Oh? And what might that be?
You know what?
The driver looked down at the gnome with a small smirk.
Oh, I thought I smelled desperation and disappointment.
What?
Now, gentlemen, there's no need to be uncivil. I have no reason to believe that this fine gnome has any reason to lie, so I do believe you owe him an apology.
I already apologized for him being a stupid little shit.
Sir, I'll have to ask you to watch your language.
Well, I will have to ask you to fuck yourself.
That, sir, is enough. I'm going to have to take you to jail until we sort this out.
I don't know who you think you are, but I am a royal carriage driver, which means you don't have the authority.
The gnome and the constable stood silent for a moment, pondering the words.
All I want is a proper apology.
Mr. Gnome, I beseech you to take a breath and try to move on with your day. This is a lost effort.
What? Are you kidding me? You haven't even tried. You're a terrible officer of the law.
No, Mr. Gnome. There's no need for further abrasiveness.
Take the loss, little one. Your day will be much better that way.
After a few more moments of arguing, the constable decided the situation was beyond his resolution.
Clearly, this situation is beyond my resolution. So, I'm afraid I'll have to attend to my other duties. I'm the judge for the pie contest today.
That sounds like a wonderful time.
Indeed it is.
You're just gonna leave? Just like that? You, sir, are an ass.
The words stuck to the gnome's lips, as he had never used a curse word before.
My goodness, sir! There's no need for such vulgarity.
It does seem a little beneath you. Not that there's much room.
At these words, the gnome felt a well of white-hot rage, and his blood began to boil.
All I wanted was an apology.
If you don't calm down, sir, I'll have to place you in a holding cell until you do.
You're threatening to arrest me. He committed the crime and I am to be arrested.
You do seem like a bit of a psycho.
Fuck you.
The gnome shouted, as he was engulfed by a dark power, and a deep magic was awoken within him. He felt as though he had the strength to topple the whole kingdom. Empowered by this new energy, the gnome leapt from the ground and lunged at the driver. The gnome grasped tightly onto the driver's throat and squeezed with all his might. The driver attempted to cry for help, his eyes filled with terror. But before he could make more than a whimper, The gnome pulled his head clean off. The Constable General was frozen with fear as he watched the gnome dismember the driver piece by piece, and started finger-painting swear words on the royal carriage. As the constable turned to run, the gnome leapt from the wet pool of entrails and onto the constable's back. The constable cried out for help, but there was no time. The gnome pulled the constable's head off of his shoulders, and then kicked the head so hard that it flew into the center of Town Square, where it landed in the middle of Mrs. Shutterbun's award-winning peach cobbler. Having never seen anything like it before, the startled townspeople stood silently staring at the macabre sight. Just then, a loud scream was heard in the distance. Drunk on the blood of the first two victims, the gnome made his way to town, where, for the next 7 hours, the screams of his victims filled the air. As the sun began to set, the gnome stood over the pile of burning corpses that used to be the townspeople. Watching the glorious sunset and wearing the prince's crown, he pondered his future, and thus the evil gnome was born. Eventually, he met Sir TalksALot, but that is a story for another time. In the meantime, remember the moral of the story. Don't skip your morning coffee, or you may become a murderer. The end.
It's the Gnome Fairytales with the evil gnome. Thanks for stopping by, hope you had a good time, maybe a laugh or two. It's the Gnome Fairytales with the evil gnome. Please don't cry, now we say goodbye with the evil gnome.
Until next time.